The gun was already pressed against the back of my neck when Damien walked past me without blinking. Not a flinch. Not a hesitation. He kept his hand in his bride's and his eyes forward and his jaw set in that particular way he had, the way that meant he was performing calm rather than feeling it, and the man behind me dug the barrel in harder, just a fraction, just enough to remind me it was there, and I stood in the receiving line of Damien Voss's wedding with a weapon at my spine and my 5-month belly hidden under blue silk, and I thought, he knew. He knew I would come. He knew what would be waiting for me. His lips moved as he passed. 2 words, barely breath, stay calm. Then he was gone, folding back into the noise and flowers and crystal of his own reception, and the man behind me murmured something about stepping outside, and I went because the gun was very real and because I had already counted the exits and because I needed to understand how badly I had miscalculated before I decided what to do about it. This is the part one keep returning to. Not the reception, not the ceremony, not the 11 days that came after. That moment in the receiving line, the gun, the 2 words, the particular quality of Damien's face as he passed me, is where everything collapsed into its actual shape. Where I stopped seeing what I'd constructed and started seeing what was real. Took me 6 months to get there. My name is not important. In the work I do, names are administrative, labels attached to covers, shuffled and replaced as needed. What's relevant is that I had been an intelligence officer for 12 years when I was assigned to the Voss operation, that I had run 11 previous operations with clean extractions and complete intelligence packages, and that I had never once compromised an assignment through personal involvement. I want to be clear about that. It matters for what comes later. The assignment came through in August of the previous year. A financial intelligence operation, the kind that looks from the outside like sophisticated accounting work and is, from the inside, like standing in a dark room trying to construct a 3-dimensional map from sounds alone. The target was a network of shell companies moving significant money through jurisdictions that didn't ask questions. At the center of the web was a name, Damien Voss. 38 years old. Swiss-registered investment firm. Education in Zurich and Sao Paulo. A reputation in financial circles for being clever without appearing to try. My cover was Mara Linden. Danish compliance consultant. Believable enough to get me into the rooms I needed, bland enough not to draw attention. I'd worn similar covers before, professional women at the edges of finance, the kind people talk in front of because they've decided you're furniture. The first time I was in the same room as Damien Voss, he looked at me like I was not furniture. That should have been my signal. That specific quality of attention, not aggressive, not flirtatious, something more precise, was the first data point I failed to correctly analyze. I told myself it was general social intelligence on his part. I told myself some people simply looked at everyone that way. I was already lying to myself by day 3. That's how early it started. Vienna, late September. A financial technology conference in a hotel that smelled like money and recycled air. I was there to map his professional network, identify his contacts, build the picture of who moved through his orbit. I had a seat at a panel lunch. He sat across from me because the room was full and the alternatives were worse, and he ordered sparkling water and asked what I thought of the morning's keynote. I gave him a deliberately unremarkable answer. Solid, slightly dull, the kind of response that invites no further inquiry. This is standard practice. You control how interesting you appear, you control how much space you take up, you control the encounter. He looked at me for a moment with something that was not quite a smile. You don't actually believe that, he said. My coffee cup was halfway to my mouth. I set it down. Sorry? What you just said. You don't believe it? Your voice went flat on the second sentence. He tilted his head just slightly. What do you actually think? I had 2 options in that moment. One was to maintain the bland surface and find a reason to end the conversation. The other was to engage, to give him something real enough to be interesting without giving him anything operationally significant. I chose wrong. I told him what I actually thought about the keynote. Not everything, not the sharpest version of it, but something closer to true than I'd intended. And he listened the way people rarely listen, not waiting for his turn but actually following, adjusting, building on it. We talked through lunch and into the coffee service, and I left the table 40 minutes later with my pulse slightly elevated and 2 observations I didn't want to have made: that he was considerably more intelligent than his file suggested, and that I had just enjoyed a conversation for the first time in 4 months. I filed a routine report that evening. Did not include the conversation. By December we were meeting regularly in Zurich. His idea initially, a follow-up coffee after a second conference encounter that I had not engineered but had not avoided, and then a pattern that established itself with the particular ease of things neither person is trying to prevent. He thought I was Mara Linden, a consultant who moved between financial centers and found them all slightly exhausting. I thought I was running a controlled operation. We were both partially right. The intelligence was coming in. Not as fast as the agency wanted, but clean: account structures, counterparty relationships, the shape of how the money moved. I was good at this work. Even compromised, even with the strange doubling of being simultaneously Elena and Mara across every lunch and walk and long conversation, I was good at the actual job. What I wasn't good at was logging all of it. There were conversations I summarized. Meetings I reported as uneventful that had contained things I wasn't ready to submit. Not fabrications, I never fabricated, but omissions carefully shaped, the intelligence equivalent of cropping a photograph. I told myself this was operational discretion. I told myself I was protecting source continuity. My handler Sasha sent a flag in late November. Output quality declining. Assessment required. I wrote back that I was managing a personal matter. The personal matter was that I had stopped being able to clearly identify where Mara ended and I began. This is not a thing that is supposed to happen. You know this going in. You understand, in the abstract, that extended cover work creates pressure on identity, that the longer you inhabit another person, the more their habits colonize your own. What they don't fully train you for is the specific situation where the cover falls in love before you notice it's happening, and by the time you notice, the love is already yours too. I'm describing it clinically because that's the only way I can still get through it. The fact of the matter is simpler and worse. I loved him. Not Mara loved him. I did. Elena, who had a real name and a real history and 12 years of work she'd kept carefully separate from everything personal. She loved him and she didn't tell anyone, and she kept filing the compromised reports, and she convinced herself she was managing it. Then January came, and 3 consecutive mornings of nausea, and a calculation I made in a Lisbon pharmacy while staring at a shelf of products I'd never had reason to buy before. 3 tests. Different pharmacies. Same result. I sat on the bathroom floor of my cover apartment for 50 minutes. The radiator ticked. Traffic moved outside. The world continued with complete indifference to the fact that everything had just changed shape. I didn't tell him. I built myself an argument for this that was structurally sound and emotionally convenient. Disclosure would compromise the operation, would require me to report a relationship that should have been reported months ago, would result in my extraction and the assignment of a new officer who would have to rebuild all the access I'd developed. The operation needed me. The intelligence was too close to complete. All of this was true. None of it was why I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him because I didn't know what he would do. And I didn't know what I would do with whatever he did. There was no protocol for this. No training module, no case study, no senior officer I could call and say, "I'm 5 weeks pregnant with my target's child and I think I'm in love with him and I don't know how to finish this assignment." So I didn't say it. I put it somewhere interior and load-bearing and I kept working. In February, Sasha made contact through a physical drop for the first time in the operation. A postcard under the apartment door, restaurant name in Porto on the back. I took the train and sat across from her in a booth that smelled like salt and old wood, and she slid a photograph across the table. Damien. Across from a woman I didn't recognize. A Geneva restaurant I knew. His fiancée, Sasha said. The engagement was announced 4 days ago. I looked at the photograph. Damien's posture, the set of his shoulders, the angle of his head, was the posture I recognized from our meetings. Engaged, considering, slightly reserved in the way that wasn't coldness but was the shape of someone accustomed to thinking before speaking. Her name, Sasha said, is Isabel Hartmann. I looked up. George Hartmann's daughter, she said. George Hartmann was not a name that needed explanation in the circles I moved in. It was a name that explained other things, connected dots that had been floating separately and suddenly had structure. I understood in that moment that the operation I thought I was running was considerably smaller than the one I was actually inside. I took the train back to Lisbon. 4 hours. Both hands on the armrest. Running arithmetic the entire way. I kept going back. After the photograph, after Isabel's name, after I understood what the engagement meant about Damien's position in the Hartmann network, I kept meeting him. I told myself it was operational. I told myself each meeting was still generating usable intelligence, still building toward the account confirmations the agency needed. I was 3 months pregnant and I was still sitting across from him in Zurich restaurants arguing about economic theory and watching his face and feeling the particular physical sensation of someone being slowly taken apart from the inside. He never mentioned Isabel. I never asked. We existed in a room together that had its own atmosphere, its own implicit rules, and one of the rules was that neither of us named what was actually happening. I thought at the time that this was my evasion, that I was maintaining the silence to protect my cover, to keep the operation viable 1 more week, 2 more weeks, just until I had what I needed. What I didn't know until the wedding was that he was maintaining it too. For different reasons. The final account confirmation came through in late March. I transferred the intelligence package to Sasha and received the extraction order within the hour. Good work. Begin extraction. Do not make contact again. I read it 3 times. Then I got the wedding invitation. It arrived physical, cream envelope, addressed to Mara Linden at the cover address. Inside, embossed card, church in Zurich, first Saturday in May. And in the bottom corner, his handwriting for words, I'd like you there. Sasha said do not attend. I attended. I've tried to construct the honest version of why. The partially honest version is that I believed there was residual intelligence value, that observing Damien move through the Hartmann family structure at close range, on a high-stakes social occasion, would yield something the formal package had missed. This is not untrue. It's also not sufficient. The sufficient version is that I was 4 months pregnant and I needed to put myself in a room with him and understand what he was. Whether what we'd had was entirely constructed on his side. Whether the person I'd allowed inside my real self, not Mara me, had been talking to something real or something curated. I needed to know that before I disappeared. So I wore a blue dress loose enough to hide what I hadn't told anyone. I took a commercial flight to Zurich under a travel document that was not my primary cover. I arrived at the church 20 minutes early, took my seat in the 3rd row on the groom's side, and I waited. The church filled. I catalogued faces, Hartmann associates, financial contacts from the intelligence files, people from Damien's professional orbit who I knew by photograph and reputation. I mapped the room the way I always mapped rooms, exits and adjacencies and the locations of the people who made me uneasy. George Hartmann arrived and made me uneasy immediately. He was shorter than I'd expected from photographs, compact, with the self-containment of someone who has never had to perform authority because authority was simply the medium he moved through. He took his seat in the front row and said something to the woman beside him that made her laugh quietly, and he didn't smile. Damien walked in from the side entrance at 11:58. He looked the same. This sounds obvious and is not. After 4 months of withdrawal, no contact, only the memory of contact, I had half expected him to look different. Smaller somehow. The way people sometimes diminish in absence from the size they occupied in your active imagination. He looked the same. The particular way he held himself, the quality of his attention as he scanned the room. He found me in under 3 seconds. Something crossed his face. Not shock. Not guilt. Something that resolved very quickly into perfect social composure. So quickly that if I hadn't been watching for exactly that resolution, I would have missed it entirely. His eyes stayed on me for less than 2 seconds. His lips moved. Act like nothing happened. Then the organ started and Isabel walked in on her father's arm, and I sat in the 3rd row and breathed. I made it through the ceremony. I made it through the recessional and the movement to the reception and the champagne service and the first hour of polite social noise. My seat was at table 11 near the emergency exit, positioned with a clear sight line to the main entrance, and I understood, sitting down, that this placement was not the wedding planner's decision. He put me there. Specifically. With specific awareness of how I would read the location. I left the champagne untouched. I watched him work the room, the precise social calibration of it, the way he allocated warmth and attention, moved between the Hartmann contingent and his own professional contacts with the practiced ease of someone who had been navigating multiple simultaneous allegiances for a long time. I watched Isabel watch him. She was not naive. I registered that within minutes. Her eyes followed him with the particular attention of someone who has learned to read a person they don't entirely trust. I was still sitting with that observation when someone sat down in the empty chair beside me. Not Damien. A man I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, jacket that fit too well, the kind of tan you get in places without weather. He picked up a champagne glass from the table and held it without drinking and said very quietly in accented English, "You should not have come here." I kept my eyes on the dance floor. "Mara Linden doesn't exist," he said. "We've known that since April. 4 months. 4 months of meetings, of reports I'd filed, of intelligence I'd thought was clean, and they'd known for 4 months. Who is we?" I said. "People who are cautious about uninvited guests." He turned the champagne glass. "Mr. Voss wanted you here. That's the only reason you're sitting down instead of having a different kind of conversation elsewhere. His wanting should not be mistaken for protection." I looked at him for the first time. His face was pleasant and entirely cold. "You have until the end of the evening," he said. "After that, the accommodation Mr. Voss requested expires." He stood up, replaced the champagne glass and walked back toward the Hartmann table. I sat very still. 12 years of training is mostly breathing. It is controlling the physiological cascade that the body initiates when it registers threat, the adrenaline, the tunnel vision, the urge toward immediate action, and redirecting it into deliberate useful movement. I breathed. I let the room re-establish itself around me. I counted 8 possible complications and ranked them by immediacy. Then Damien sat down in the newly empty chair. He didn't look at me directly. Eyes on the dance floor, glass of water, the body language of a man having a relaxed moment at his own wedding reception. You spoke to Remy, he said. Is that his name? He won't touch you here. Or tonight. Pause. The man he reports to knows you attended. I've managed the explanation. You're a former business contact of Mara Linden's. The accounts are in order. How long does that hold? Long enough. He finally turned slightly toward me. You received the invitation. Clearly. I wasn't certain you would come. You put me at table 11. Pause. I put every precaution in place in case you came. I wasn't certain. He looked back at the dance floor. Your operation is burned. The accounts we fed your agency will take 3 years to untangle, and by then the relevant infrastructure will have been dissolved and rebuilt elsewhere. I let that land. Let myself feel the full weight of 14 months, the clean extractions, the carefully filed reports, the 3 weeks of operational silence I'd observed after the extraction order, all of it redirected, used, shaped into a delay mechanism. The intelligence was a decoy, I said. The intelligence was a filter. He said it precisely. Your agency was going to move on the financial network. That movement needed to be delayed while certain documentation was completed. Documentation of what? He didn't answer immediately. He turned his water glass in a slow circle. On the dance floor, Isabel was dancing with a man I recognized from a financial sector file, a fund manager with interests across 3 jurisdictions, a face I'd cataloged an hour ago and not yet fully placed. There is an envelope under your place setting, Damien said. Take it when you leave. Don't open it here. Why? Because what's in it is worth more than everything your operation collected, and I need you to be somewhere safe when you read it. I sat with that for a moment. The music shifted, something slower, more formal. Couples reorganized on the dance floor. You knew since April, I said. You kept meeting me. Yes. Why? He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, because the meetings were real. Whatever else was happening, the meetings were real. I looked at the side of his face. The careful containment of it. The places where it wasn't quite contained. The child? I said quietly. A muscle in his jaw moved. I noticed in church, he said. The dress, he stopped. Are you well? That's not a question you have standing to ask. No. He stood, buttoned his jacket. Take the envelope. Leave through the exit behind you. There's a car on the side street, dark blue, idling. It'll take you to the airport. He looked at me directly for the first time, and his face did something that I have spent months trying to accurately describe and can only render approximately. It broke open slightly, just for a second, just enough. I'm sorry, he said. For the parts that were mine. Then he walked back into his wedding. The envelope contained account numbers I didn't recognize, not the shells the operation had mapped, but something structured differently, with routing codes and jurisdictions I hadn't encountered in the files. And beneath the numbers, 4 words in his handwriting, not the money. What it moves. I was on the plane before I understood what that meant. Not the financial crime. The instrument. The money was the mechanism. A delivery system for something else, something the shell companies and the account structures and 14 months of my careful intelligence work had been arranged in front of like a curtain. I read the routing codes again. Identified 3 jurisdictions. Iceland, Singapore, Liechtenstein. Ran them against what I'd memorized from the operational files and found one match. A subsidiary name I'd flagged in month 3 and never fully traced. Sasha picked up on the second ring when I called from the airport. I told her I was in Zurich. The silence that followed had texture. Then, you attended. I attended. The operation is burned. He confirmed it. They've known since April. The accounts are decoy architecture. I paused. He gave me something else. Elena. Listen. I read her the account numbers from the envelope. These aren't in anything we built. Different formatting, different jurisdictions. He said not the money, what it moves. I heard her breathing change. I need 2 weeks, I said. And authorization to make contact. She stopped. Started again. How far along? I closed my eyes. 5 months. The airport announcements moved through the terminal around me. A family with a stroller negotiated the space near my gate. Ordinary life, indifferent and continuous. 2 weeks, Sasha said finally. Check in every 6 hours. And Elena, I want complete reports. Everything. Everything, I said. I spent 72 hours in the Lisbon apartment building what I hadn't been allowed to build inside the formal operation. The full picture, uncropped. Callum, who operated in the seam between intelligence services, met me in Porto and put a satellite photograph on the table. A facility in northern Finland registered as a data processing center, 14 months under construction. 3 of the routing codes from Damien's envelope matched the facility's procurement records. It wasn't a data processing center. What Hartman had built, across 4 sites in 3 countries, was infrastructure for something I'd only encountered theoretically. A system capable of manipulating financial market data at a scale and speed that made the manipulation invisible until the damage was irreversible. Not theft. Destabilization. The kind of economic disruption that doesn't have a single point of failure, can't be shut down through conventional means, and by the time it's identified looks like market volatility rather than attack. The financial crime my operation had been mapping was the funding mechanism. The shell companies were the construction budget. 14 months of agency focus on money laundering had kept every relevant intelligence service looking at the wrong layer. I contacted Damien through the Vienna email address. Told him I'd read the note. Asked him to meet me. His response took 4 hours. 3 days. Same place. He was already at the table when I arrived. This surprised me. He was usually precisely on time, which I'd learned to read as a form of control. Being early meant something was different. I sat down. We looked at each other across a table in a restaurant in Vienna where 8 months earlier, I'd given him a deliberately unremarkable answer and he'd told me he didn't believe a word of it. You understand what I handed you, he said. Yes. The facility. And 3 others. I've located 2 of them. I watched his face. You've been building documentation for how long? Since I understood what it was. He moved his water glass slightly to the left. I went into the Hartman network believing it was sophisticated tax avoidance. By the time I understood the actual architecture, I was embedded deeply enough that extraction without evidence would have looked like defection. Or disappearance. So you stayed. I stayed and I built a record. He looked at me steadily. The operation your agency was running was going to collapse the financial layer and drive the network underground before the documentation was complete. I needed 6 more months. Feeding your operation decoy intelligence bought 6 months. You used me. He didn't look away. I used your operation. Those aren't identical. They're close enough. Yes, he said. They are. The waiter came and we both ordered things neither of us would touch and he left and the silence came back. The engagement, I said. Isabel. The engagement gave me access to Hartman's operational documents. Things no outside party would ever see. He said it without flinching, which was somehow worse than if he'd flinched. I want you to understand that clearly. The access was the reason. And Isabel. Isabel is... He stopped. She's not what I expected. She's not her father. He said it like a disclosure he'd been deciding whether to make. She doesn't know what he built. I need you to understand that when this moves forward. I looked at his hands on the table. 12 years of reading people in rooms and I still couldn't fully read him. That was the honest answer. He was the most opaque person I had ever sat across from and also the person I'd been most certain, at points, that I understood. The child, I said. Something in him went very still. I'm not asking you for anything, I said. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you because you figured it out and we're apparently past the point where pretending is operational. I'm not pretending, he said. I know you're not. That's what makes this difficult. He leaned forward slightly. What do you need from me? For the operation, the facility, the testimony, all of it. Tell me what you need. Everything you have. The full documentation, the procurement records, your account of how the network was constructed. Testimony to an interagency working group. I paused. It ends the marriage. You understand that. The marriage ended when I walked her down that aisle under false pretenses. He said it quietly. I've understood that since April. We sat there a moment. And after, he said. The child. After all of this. I don't know yet, I said. It was the most honest thing I'd said in a long time. I genuinely don't know. He nodded slowly. As if that was actually enough. 11 days. Hotel rooms and encrypted channels, and one meeting in the back of a moving car because Callum's contact had a pathological relationship with staying in one place. The moment 3 agencies committed resources simultaneously and the momentum stopped being theoretical. The afternoon I stood in a conference room and briefed 6 senior officers from 4 countries, using Damien's documentation and my own analysis, and watched their faces as the shape of what Hartmann had built became visible. George Hartmann was arrested on a Thursday. Damien testified, voluntarily and in full. I was in Lisbon when Sasha's message came through, facilities secured, network dismantled, take your leave. I was 7 months pregnant. I sat at the kitchen table of the apartment with the now functioning radiator and I read the message and I put the phone down and I looked out the window at the Tagus River moving below, indifferent, continuous, the way rivers are. Damien texted from a number I hadn't given him an hour later. How are you? I held the phone. Outside, a boat crossed the river, small, purposeful, making its way against the current with the particular patience of things that have been doing this a long time. I thought about the receiving line at his wedding. The gun at my spine, the 2 words, the quality of his face as he passed. I thought about Vienna, about the lunch where I'd given him a deliberately unremarkable answer and he told me he didn't believe a word of it. I thought about the park in Zurich where we'd sat for 3 hours talking about who we might have been and I'd deleted the recording after listening to it 4 times. I thought about what it means to know someone. Whether 6 months of documented contact under false pretenses constituted knowing. Whether you could strip away the covers, his and mine, and find something real underneath, or whether we were both so deeply constructed by this work that real was no longer a category that applied. I didn't have the intelligence to answer that question. I might never have enough. The baby moved. That insistent, undeniable flutter. More pronounced now, more certain, a small person with opinions about the world they were arriving into. I put my hand on my abdomen in that reflex I'd developed over months, worn smooth by repetition, and I sat in my kitchen in Lisbon in the long blue October light. I picked up the phone. Typed, "We should talk." His response came in under a minute. "Yes." I set the phone down. Stood up. Moved to the window. The river was doing what it always did, moving toward the sea with the patience of something that has never had to decide anything. Some operations end cleanly, the target secured, the intelligence delivered, the cover dissolved, the officer extracted. Clean accounting. A file that closes. Some operations end with you standing at a window 7 months pregnant, looking at a river, holding a conversation you don't know the outcome of, in a life you didn't plan toward and can't fully map from here. I'd spent 12 years building things I could trust. Structures of intelligence, carefully verified, that told you something true about how the world was arranged. I was good at it. I was, by most measures, excellent at it. What I couldn't build, what no amount of training had equipped me for, was certainty about this. About him. About what we were, underneath everything we'd been doing to each other, whether anything survived that, whether it was worth finding out. The river kept moving. I stayed at the window a long time. Then I picked up the phone and started writing.